follow up with all her wonderful questions. All right, let's get started. We are in Parshat Shemini. I apologize, I was a minute late. We starting baseball and softball season, so we had a coaches meeting. Excuse me. Which I was caught up with. But anyway, let's get started on Parshat Shemini. So the Parsha is known for two primary themes. The first, of course, being the death of Nadav and Avihu. And that is a fascinating episode, and we're going to touch on that tangentially today. And the second half of the parsha, which we discussed last year, deals with is the primary source in the Torah for laws of kashrut and kosher animals and non-kosher animals. So we're not going to focus on that tonight. Those are the two major things in Parshat Shemini. But within the story of the death of Nadav and Avihu, there's one curious detail that I wanted to delve into and develop tonight. And I'm very much indebted. I had notes on this detail of, wow, this is really interesting. I want to know more about it. And then, as I tell you, whenever we're in the car, it's an opportunity for me to listen to some shiurim and podcasts. And so I chanced upon this. I never heard of this rabbi before, Rabbi Donnie Schreiber. He lives in Ra'anana in Israel. And picked up on this exact detail that had bothered me. So I was very happy to have found that and had the opportunity to listen to it. So let's get into it. We're in the middle of the story of Nadav and Avihu, and this is right after they have died. Okay, so actually let's get into it. Vayikubnei Aaron Nadav Avihu ish machtakto, vayitnu bahen eish vayisimu alav ketoret v'yakrivu lifnei Hashem eish zara shelo tziva otam. The sons of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, each took their fire pan and they placed on it a fire or an incense offering, and they offered it before Hashem, a foreign fire which they had not been commanded. A fire came from God and consumed them, and they died before God. Vayomer Moshe el Aharon, hu asher diber Hashem lemor b'krovai kadesh v'pnei chalam mekabed v'yidom Aharon. I feel very bad rushing through this. Every detail here is so rich, but this is not our focus for tonight. So we're going to go quickly through this first part. Moshe says to Aaron, this is what God said, be krovai kadesh, and through those who are near to me will I be sanctified, and I will be glorified in front of the entire nation. And Aaron was silent. And this is our key pasuk, number 4. Vayikra Moshe el Mishael ve'el Eltzafan b'nei Uziel dod Aharon. Vayomer aleihem kirvu su'at achechem me'etz pnei hakodesh al michutz lamachaneh. Moshe calls Mishael and Eltzafan, the sons of Uziel, the uncle of Aharon. He says to them, come close to your brothers from within the holiness, within the Beis Hamikdash, the Mishkan, and take them out of the camp. They came close and they took them by their tunics to the outskirts of the camp, kasher divrei Moshe, as Moshe had instructed them. Okay, so we have right after they die, and again, we're not going to delve into what they did. Was this a positive? We never think of death as positive, but there are certainly those who say it was a positive result of having come very close to God. Those who say it was a very negative, they were totally inappropriate. We're not getting into that tonight. We're just focusing on the aftermath of their death, that Moshe turns to Mishael and Eltzafan, the sons of Uziel, Aaron's uncle. What strikes you as curious about that description?
Well, shouldn't they be part of the priestly caste? Shouldn't they're Levium, but isn't there a problem with them handling a corpse?
Okay, so you're correct, Jeff. They're Levium, right? It was only Aaron's branch of the tribe who was given the distinction of Kohanim. So a Levi has no prohibition against becoming impure. There's no issue with that, but there might be an issue with the Levi entering into certain places of the Mishkan.
Ah,
Right? There are certain places that are reserved only for a Kohen. So we do have that question.
Why does it say the uncle of Aaron? I mean, it's Moshe's uncle too.
Yeah, that always bothered me. That was originally cued me into this. What does it mean, the uncle of Aaron? Aaron's uncle is Moshe's uncle.
Right.
So why does it emphasize the uncle of Aaron?
To show their closeness to the deceased.
Okay. Shows the closeness to the deceased. Okay, I mean that's fair. And as a follow-up to that, why specifically these cousins of Aaron?
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you look down, if we cheat down a little bit to source number 3,
No.
Bnei Kahat, Amram veYitzar veChevron veUzio, Shnei Chayei Kehat, Shalosh U'Shloshim Me'at Shana. The children of Kehat were Amram, Yitzhar, Chevron, and Uziel. There are 3 uncles that Aaron and Moshe and Miriam have. So why is it specifically Uziel and his children that are chosen for this task? All right, those are.
Well, Uziel would be the helpers of God.
Uziel is the helper of God. Say a little bit more about that.
I'm just breaking the name up.
That would be Azriel. Azor is to help.
Okay.
Uziel, Oz is strength.
Strength. Sorry.
Of God. Yeah. So that's an interesting. Maybe there's something in his name that would indicate his reason he was chosen for it. And as a thought, right? So one branch of the question is why specifically Uziel or Uziel's children, and I think we could ask another question, which is why did it have to go to the cousins at all? How many children did Aaron have?
4 sons.
He had 4 sons. Only 2 of them died. So why is this falling on the cousins and not on the remaining sons?
Well, the cousins are priests, and they might be contaminated by handling a corpse.
Okay, so Jeff is correct that a priest generally can't handle a corpse, but there are exceptions to that rule. What are the exceptions to who a priest can become tamei for?
Specific relations?
Yeah, so among those, right, a parent, God forbid, a child, a spouse, and a sibling. So brothers, even Kohanim brothers, could become tamei to take care of their brother. Aaron himself could have. Maybe we'll say a Kohen Gadol is different, but certainly Elazar and Itamar, the remaining sons, there's no halachic issue with them dealing with the bodies. Okay.
Where are Moshe's sons in this?
Where are Moshe's sons in this? We
They are
have
not
no idea.
Kohanim. They are close relations, and it's as close as Moshe could get instead of himself going to do that. And it's a very, very weird, anomalous circumstance.
Right. So Moshe's sons, quite interestingly, don't really take any role certainly in any leadership that we know of. And there's a lot to say about that. There also seems to be they're 1 generation removed. So we asked why not Aaron's sons. So if we're asking why not Aaron's sons, we should ask why not Moshe's sons. But for whatever reason, it's determined that 1 generation above. So the Aaron's cousins and not his nephews. So I don't know, but Moshe's sons, yeah, I guess they're legitimate candidates as well as anyone else. But we never see them taking any public role. So that's another interesting side note. So one suggestion is offered by Baruch Levine, who is the author and editor of the JPS edition on Vayikra. And he says, in ancient Israel, certain funerary functions may have been the traditional responsibility of one's close relatives. Amos 6:10 mentions that in the destruction to come, one's uncle and his burner, Misarfo, may have been one and the same person, removed from dwellings ravaged by fire, the bones of those caught in the devastation. Thus, it may not have been coincidental that the uncle of Nadav and Avihu undertook to remove their bodies. Okay, that's fine, but it doesn't explain why specifically them. But it does show us that maybe the mourning and the responsibility either was naturally or assumed to be falling on the extended family. That could be either to show that the entire extended family is part of the mourning, or as a way to show that the close relatives are too troubled, or specifically were not involved. It specifically was on more distant relatives and not on the immediate relatives. So that's one suggestion, that this is just the way things normally were, and we don't need to worry so much about why specifically them. Obviously, we're not going to stop with that. We're going to see if there's a more fundamental connection, but he does put that out there. Okay, the Ramban, Jeff, this is picking up on your comments. If you go in the English, it's the bolded lines, and someone will tell me when I need to scroll down to the next page. The Ramban says, first he goes through and says that generally only Kohanim could go into the Kodesh Kodashim, into the Holy of Holies, and only if they were pure, and only if they were eligible to serve. But in exceptional circumstances, you could break those rules, or there were specific times when those rules didn't have to be followed. But then he says, Achshav hayom hazeh ein sham kohanim shahare nitztavu shelo yitamu. On this specific day, when Nadav and Avihu died, there were no available kohanim, because who were the only kohanim in existence after their death? It was Aaron, Eleazar, and Itamar. And they had been instructed by Moshe not to defile themselves. Whether, because they were still busy with dedicating the Mishkan. They were still involved in the dedication. They weren't allowed to show any sign of public mourning. Okay, and then he explains that so therefore the cousins were the next closest available relatives to do so. Again, he doesn't say why specifically them, but why specifically these two cousins, but they were the next level of relatives available to do so. They were Levium, and he adds that that's why they dragged them out by the tunic, by the ketonet, because they didn't physically enter into the Kodesh Kodashim, into the space in the Mishkan where non-Kohanim were not allowed to go. They stood on the outside and used some sort of tools to drag them out by their clothing. Okay, so again, doesn't really get to any fundamental connection, but does offer at least a palatable explanation for why this emphasis. The real, I think the point of departure for where things start to get interesting, I think, is in source number 6. And you'll tell me if you agree or not. Mimashma shene'emar ubenei kahat amram v'yitzar v'chevon v'uziel eini odea she'uziel dod Aharon. So the Midrash in Yalkut Shimoni is picking up on the fact, why does it say dod Aharon, Aaron's uncle? Right? We already know this family relationship from the pasuk we saw in Sefer Shmot. We already know that Uziel was a brother to Amram, who was Aaron's father. So we already know that Uziel is Aaron's uncle. Why does the Torah, right? The Torah generally doesn't use any extra words, so why does it emphasize and add that Uziel is Aaron's uncle? Mekish Masei Uziel and Masei Aaron. So the Medrash tells us that the Torah is trying to compare or to connect the actions of Uziel with the actions of Aharon. Ma Aharon rodef shalom b'Yisrael, af Uziel rodef shalom b'Yisrael. Just as Aaron was a pursuer of peace among Israel, and we're all familiar with the various stories and midrashim that the rabbis have to show what lengths Aaron went to bring peace among the Jewish people. So the Medrash says that Uziel did the exact same thing. Minayin shaya Aaron rodef shalom b'Yisrael, shene'amar vayeru kol eda ki kava Aaron, vayivkur et Aharon shloshim yom kol beit Yisrael. How do we know that Aaron was a pursuer of peace? Because when he dies, it says that Aaron died, and they cried for him, they mourned for him for 30 days. Kol Beit Yisrael, the entire house of Israel. Moshe lo bachu ela b'nei Yisrael. When Moshe dies, the Torah tells us that b'nei Yisrael cried for him. It doesn't say Kol Beit Yisrael. It doesn't say the entire house of Israel. It seems to be a more inclusive description of the nation when they mourned for Aaron than when they mourned for Moshe. Lo amar she'Aaron lo amar leish sarachta v'lo isha saracht aval Moshe mipnei shehochichan ne'amar bo b'nei Yisrael. Because Aaron, we have no record of him ever rebuking any Jew. He never pointed out anyone's faults. But Moshe many times rebuked the people. And that's why it only says b'nei Yisrael, not the entire nation. I'm not sure if it's picking up on Bnei Yisrael, the sons and not the daughters. But anyway, Aaron is seen as having had a better, stronger relationship with the entire nation. And the Medrash tells us, it doesn't tell us how, but it tells us that Uziel was similar in his relationship, and having positive relationships with the entire nation. And he was also one who pursued peace and brought peace to the people. Any reactions to what we've seen so far?
I'm so glad that you're doing this. Thank you, Rabbi. The question occurred to me when I was reading it. Now, who are these people? So thank you.
Okay, yeah, I had the exact same question. You missed my introduction.
Very good.
Yeah, so
I finally got the Hebrew installed on my new computer.
Oh,
my
great.
God.
Okay.
Yeah. So I could just switch them.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so Uziel is seen as having similar character traits as Aharon, and if that's the case, we might ask the question why Uziel's sons are tasked with removing the bodies of Nadav and Abihu, and not Uziel himself. But no, I don't see anyone getting into that level of detail here. We're just going to focus on, I guess, the Uziel family. So let's go down to the Abarbanel and the Netziv, who say similar things. The Abarbanel says, "Yinetziva leMishael ve'el-Tzafan sheyiknesu leheichal laseit et hametim lefi she'anu banav hayu bichlal al nafshot meitz lo yavo." So the exact same thing that the Ramban said, that this task had to fall to Mishael and El-Tzafan because Aharon and his children were explicitly told that they cannot come into contact with the dead. Moshe Kohen HaKohanim haya bayom hahu. On the day of the dedication of the Mishkan, Moshe was elevated to status of Kohen for that day. So that's why these two were given the commandments to be the task to deal with the bodies. Shahayu b'nei dod Aharon, u'be'ahava hayu im hametim. Since they were Aaron's cousins, and they had a deep love for the dead, kimo achim, like brothers. Okay, so they were specifically close, right? Maybe implying of all the cousins that they had the closest relationship with Nadav and Abihu. They were the ones who were most appropriate based on their relationship with the deceased. The Netziv says similarly. Let me give you the English for the Netziv. El Mishael vel Tzafan b'nei Uziel dod Aharon, kvar nidrash b'Torah Kohanim l'may k'tiv dod Aharon, l'fi hapshat mashmut dod k'mo yedidut, milashon ki tovim dodecha. Okay, so he says, according to the pshat, we should read dod not only, or not primarily as meaning uncle, but as meaning yedid, a friend, a companion.
Yeah.
Okay?
Sure.
So this explains why specifically the sons of Uziel and not the other cousins of Aaron, the sons of the other brothers of Amram. Ela mishum sheyada Moshe sheyesh mehem mekanim la'Aaron. Moshe knew that among the cousins, or that generation, there were those who were jealous of Aaron, and we have proof of this later on in the Torah. What's the proof of that?
Korach.
Korach. Korach was Aaron's cousin, and Korach was quite jealous of Aaron and of Moshe. So Moshe knew that there were some of the cousins that were jealous. But these ones were happy for Aaron and his celebration. So that's why the children of Uziel were specified for this task, because they had a deep and authentic love for Aaron and for his sons. And not only were they happy when they were designated as Kohanim, but they were equally as distressed when tragedy struck and they were killed. Right? They were extremely modest. Furthermore, as we'll see in a moment, it was like this is another example of the younger son given prominence over the older son. Eltzaphan or Elitzaphan was designated as the chieftain, as the Nasi for Bnei Kahat, and the older brother Mishael didn't complain. So that shows their superior character traits. Gam Eltzaphan Shemo Elitzaphan. So Elitz, the proper name of this second son, the younger son, which is written Eltzaphan, is really Elitzaphan, as it appears elsewhere in Torah, but it's missing the yud here to show how modest he was. Right? This is not the first time where the absence of a letter shows modesty. The Netziv says that again they had a deep love for Aharon. There was no trace of jealousy, and they were exceptional in their own character traits, and that's why they were chosen for the task. Questions, thoughts?
It's really beautiful.
Yeah, it is. It is beautiful. So here's the pasuk that we just.
Well, the question always is, how do they know this?
Yeah, how do we know this? So that's a good question. The Medrash is a combination of trying to fill in the gaps. So it's clear that the Chumash gives us this very curious detail, and we need some way of making sense of it. So we have some common structures, right? The appearance of a name one time Elitzaphan and one time Eltzaphan, their absence from Korach's rebellion, kind of putting together all these pieces to try to make a nice picture. I'm sure if we delve deeper, we'll find other explanations and other theories that might be in direct contradiction to what we're seeing here, and that could have elements of truth also. So we know it from attempts to make sense of it, from whatever oral tradition was passed on, and at the end of the shir, you'll tell me if you think it makes sense or not, if you're convinced or not. Okay, so moving on, we've already mentioned, and here's the pasuk in its fullness. In the Beit Av Mishpachot HaKehati, Elitzaphan ben Uziel. The chieftain of the ancestral house of Kahat was Elitzaphan, the son of Uziel. Here it's written with the yud, which the Netziv says is quite significant. And keeping that in mind, we now fast forward to the story of Korah. And in the story of Korah, again, bolded in the English, and let me just find exactly where it is in the Hebrew. Okay, it's the second line from the top in the Hebrew. I always forget. Can you see my mouse?
Yep.
Okay, so that's where it is. Umara Korach lachlok im Moshe. Why did Korach argue or fight or contradict Moshe? Mitkanei al nisyuto shel Elitzaphan ben Uziel. he was jealous over the appointment of Elitzaphan ben Uziel, Sheminihu Moshe Nasi al Bnei Kahat al Pi Hadibor. Since Moshe appointed him to be the Nasi, the head of the clan, al Pi Hadibor, by God's instruction. Amar Korach, Achei Abba Arbahayu. So Korach says, my father had 4 brothers, Shene'emar Bnei Kahat, as it says, the pasuk we saw, where it lists the sons of Kahat. Amram Habachor Natzlu Shnei Banav Gedula. Amram, who was the oldest, his 2 sons have been given greatness, Moshe and Aaron. Echad Melech ve'echad Kohen Gadol. Miri Ra'ui Litol et Hashniya. Lo ani shani ben Yitzhar shehu sheni la'Amram. So who should be given the next most prestigious position among this family? Korach says it should be me. I'm the son of Yitzhar. Yitzhar was the second son. Humi Nasi et ben Achiv HaKatan mikulam. And Moshe, the chutzpah, he puts as the Nasi, the son of the youngest of these brothers. Harini cholek alav uvatel et dvarav. So therefore, I'm going to contradict and argue with him. Okay, so Eltzaphan's appointment, according to Rashi, is what stirs the jealousy of Korach. We saw previously that there already were rumblings of jealousy beforehand against Aharon and Moshe, and right, that's how we typically read the Korach story, is that he was jealous of Moshe and Aaron, or more primarily of Moshe. But here Rashi is placing it as anger against Eltzaphan. And maybe it's, he was jealous of Eltzaphan, but what could he do? Hashem had appointed him, so he just kind of made more general trouble. He didn't single out Eltzaphan by name, but he causes trouble for Moshe and Aaron nonetheless. Okay, one more explanation in this train of thought comes from the Siftei Kohen. With Mordechai HaKohen of Tzfat, not the Siftei Kohen, the Shach, who has the commentary in the Shulchan Aruch. So he says as follows.
Where are we now? Yeah.
Sorry, I'm scrolling down.
Number 11.
Number 11. Vayomer Moshe al Mishael ve'Eltzaphan atem kefi archachem she'in gdula mikem. You, because you are the most exalted, the most high-ranking. There's no one greater than you. They, Nadav and Avihu, were, I put it, vice Kohanim, assistant Kohanim, second in charge among the Kohanim. And you are vice Leviim. You are second in charge, second highest ranking among the Leviim. Im kein heim acheichem. Therefore, they are like your brothers. She'en mitaskim b'gdolim ela gdolim kamotam. Only great people can deal with great people. Elitzaphan was the Nasi, the chieftain over the Levite tribe. Shene'emar Nasi Beit Avin Shachot HaKati Elitzaphan ben Uziel. The pasuk that we've seen, the chieftain for Bnei Kahat was Elitzaphan ben Uziel. Lazer Amar Dod Aharon. That's why he's identified as Aaron's uncle. Moshe Amru Chazal. Sheyadom ela Aharon. Moshe ya Aaron odev shalom kenatem domim libanav. Right, so just as Uziel in the Medrash was similar to Aaron in being the pursuer of peace, Moshe says that it must be the case that Uziel's children are similar to Aaron's children. Avot domim zelazeh v'chein abanim. If the fathers are so similar, so too the sons. Right, it leaves open a question. Well, Nadav and Avihu, what happened to them? Not a trick question. What happened to them? They died, right? They died for giving a strange fire, a foreign fire. So there's some, again, very different explanations on whether this was a good thing or a bad thing that they did, positive or negative. But there might be some risk in comparing Elitzaphan and Mishael to say you're exactly the same. There was some there was something inappropriate that Nadav and Avihu did that we would hope was not present in anyone else. So that it raises that question as well. We have, in order for this to make sense, we have to almost force ourselves into certain understandings of what it is that Nadav and Avihu did and why they died.
Mhm.
But anyway, so that's one train of thought is as we've seen a whole collection of sources that try to find some similar characteristics, some identification of these two cousins specifically with Nadav and Abihu, or with Aharon, that there was some strong connection. They had a great love for each other. There was no jealousy. They had similar character traits, and therefore they were the most appropriate and most fitting to be mitasek with the mate, to deal with the body and taking care of that.
Rabbi
Oh,
Kaplowitz?
Yes.
It occurs to me that the model for a Jewish leader is if you think you should be leader, if you personally think you should be leader, that means you shouldn't. If
Yes.
you personally think you shouldn't be leader, then you should.
Yep.
Therefore, Nadav and Avihu going forth and saying, okay, we're going to do this, means that they shouldn't. And similarly, Korach thought that he should be the one. I mean, the similarity there is more like Nadav and Avihu to Korach and his followers than it is to Eli Tzafan and
Yeah,
Uziel.
yeah. So again,
Well said.
it's
Yeah.
leaving for sure. There is a strong theme of reluctant leadership, and that's a good thing. Again, it's a huge question about what Nadav and Abihu did, and what their if it was even characterized as a sin. If there are those who say they were just caught up in some religious ecstasy, and it wasn't. Certainly wasn't any posture of leadership that they were trying to display. Others that say no, they were taking advantage of their privileged position. So that's a huge question about what Nadav and Avihu specifically did. But you're right. I think that we can certainly say that anyone who seeks out leadership, generally, that is not the ideal model of a leader. Thank you for that. Okay. So a totally different approach to this connection brings us to Sefer Bamidbar, one of my favorite stories in the Torah. That is the story of Pesach Sheni. Okay, does everyone remember that story?
Sure.
Vayan Hashem asher yu tmeim lenefesh adam lo yachol asot Pesach b'yom hahu vayikrevu lifnei Moshe v'lifnei Aaron b'yom hahu. So there are people who were impure, having come in contact with the corpse. They could not offer the Pesach offering on that day, on the 15th of Nisan or the 14th of Nisan when it was supposed to be offered. They came before Moshe and Aaron to ask what to do. Vayomru hanashim hahema ilav anachnu tmeim lenefesh adam lama nigara levilti hakriv korban Hashem b'moado b'tofen Israel. They said, we are impure by having come in contact with the corpse. Why should we lose out to not be able to offer God's sacrifice in its proper time with the rest of Bnei Israel? Vayomer Aleichem Moshe, Indu ve'eshma'a ma'itzaveh Hashem lachem. Moshe tells them, stand and I'll see what God says for you to do. Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe le'mor, daber Bnei Israel le'mor, ish k'yer tamei lenefesh o b'derech l'cholka lachem, o l'dorotechem v'asah pesach la'Hashem. So God tells Moshe, tell Bnei Israel that if any person is impure, having come in contact with the dead, or is too far away to offer the Korban Pesach, they can offer it in the second month, in the month of Iyar, with matzah and maror. And the same rules about leaving anything over will apply equally to them. Okay, so we have the story of Korban Pesach. What's the reason that these people were not able to offer the Korban Pesach in its proper time?
Because of having touched the bodies of Nadav and Abihu.
Because of having touched the bodies of a dead. You're already jumping ahead. Gemara in
Oh,
Sukkah.
okay. I haven't read it. Okay.
So the Gemara in Sukkah says something fascinating. Okay, so the Gemara is trying to establish the principle of osek b'mitzvah patur min mitzvah. If you're busy with one mitzvah, you're exempt from another mitzvah. Okay, the classic example of that is if you're busy in a funeral procession then you're patur, you're exempt from saying Shema, from davening if the time for prayer comes. Okay, so osek b'mitzvah patur min mitzvah mehacha nafka. Mehatam nafka. It's trying to derive the source for this principle that if you're busy with one mitzvah, you are exempt from another mitzvah. Ditanya. So the source of it is Pesach Sheni. Vayi anashim asheyu tmim lenefesh adam. For people who were impure from having dealt with a corpse, and therefore they couldn't offer Korban Pesach. They were busy with the dead, and therefore were exempt from Korban Pesach. Otam anashim mihayu. Who were these people that were not able to offer the Korban Pesach on time? No say Arono Shel Yosef hayu. Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Rabbi Yossi Aglili says they were the people tasked with carrying Yosef's coffin. Remember when Bnei Israel left Egypt, they carried with them Yosef's remains to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. And so presumably for the entire 40 years they were traveling in the desert, someone was in charge of carrying Yosef's coffin. And those people certainly would have been in contact with the dead and therefore unable to offer the Korban Pesach. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Mishael ve'el Tzafan hayu. Rabbi Akiva says it was Mishael and El Tzafan, Shayu Oskim Benadav ve'Avihu, who were dealing with Nadav and Avihu. Okay, and think, does the math work out? When did the death of Nadav and Avihu occur?
The first day of Nisan in the second year.
Okay, so if it's the first day of Nisan, it doesn't quite work out.
Oh.
Because how long is Tumas Mace? How long does impurity from the dead last for?
30 days?
7
No.
days.
But there's no red heifer yet.
Okay, so there's no red heifer, so maybe it would last even longer.
Good point.
Presumably there was, but there's a second opinion that says that if the Miluim process started on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and so therefore Yom HaShmini would be the 8th day. We had 7 more than were on the 15th, so the 14th of Nisan they would have still been Tameh. Gary, unclear if there was a paraduma or not. Certainly sequentially in the Torah it's not been commanded to us, but maybe quite possibly all the mitzvot were given to Moshe at Har Sinai, so they already knew about it. So that is a good question. So anyway, it was Mishael and El Tzafan who were the people, the protagonists in our Pesach Sheni story. So now, again, I never would have come upon this on my own. This is what Rabbi Schreiber quoted in his shiur, and I'm just repeating it back to you. We have Uri Amos Shirky. He is as you can see, he was born in Algeria. He lives in Jerusalem, apparently fairly popular in Israel for his Torah commentary. And he says something beautiful and remarkable. It says, Dafka Haim. Sorry, let me get the English. Someone will tell me if I need to scroll down anymore. Dafka Haim, Bimkom laharot la'atzmam halacha, ולומר לעצמם בפשטות שמכיוון שהם צמאים הם טועים מן הפסח. So it's specifically them, it's specifically Mishael and El Tzafan. Instead of coming up with their own conclusion or their own ruling and saying, well, it makes sense that we should be exempt from the Korban Pesach since they were Tamei. But specifically, what did they do? Nikshu Moshe va'anu bikshu Pesach halacha. Nope, they weren't happy with that. They weren't comfortable with that. They wanted to be involved. And so therefore they approached Moshe and Aaron and they asked for a halachic ruling. Bazeh, Mishael ve'el Tzafan tiknu et chetam shel Nadav ve'avihu. They made a tikkun. They fixed, right? Fix is not a good translation. Is everyone familiar with the Kabbalistic notion of tikkun?
Mm-hmm.
So they made a tikkun for the sin of Nadav and Avihu. V'dafka him al yadam zachinu lemoed nosaf b'Torah moed shel Pesach Sheni. And because of this, because of what Mishael and El Tzafan did, we merited a new holiday in the Torah, the holiday of Pesach Sheni. Koto Pesach shaTorah lo tzivta alav milechatchila. The Torah, up until this point, never told us about Pesach Sheni. Okay, so whether it would have been revealed at a later point or not, we don't know. But the point is that it was revealed in their merit. Ela shehu pri yitziratam shel bnei Israel. It was created in this read by Bnei Israel, by their quest and desire to be able to continue to participate in Pesach. Zehu moed shekol mikoro behachlata shel Bnei Israel shehem zikukim l'tosefet kedusha. So this holiday of Pesach Sheni, its entire source is by the determination of Bnei Israel to add holiness into their lives. Shehem einam yacholim shelo lasot et Pesach b'toch Bnei Israel v'darshu pitaron. They couldn't offer the Korban Pesach with the rest of Bnei Israel, and they sought out a solution to their problem. Im kain, if that is the case, Bnei Uziel, im elu habaim hagid lanu kitzad yesh lechadesh kedushim b'torat Yisrael. They are the models and the paradigm for how we can offer chidushim, initiative, new approaches to Torah. Lo b'yizuma pratit, lo al yedei hora'at halacha b'fnei rabo, kim al yedei hityatzut im rabo. It's not by some private initiative. It's not by hora'at halacha b'fnei rabo, by giving a ruling in the face of their teacher, which is what many commentators say was the sin of Nadav and Avihu, that they gave halachic rulings in the face of Moshe and Aaron. Rather, it's with hityatzut, with consulting with one's rabbi, with one's teacher. Kasher yesh v'ayon amiti, lo yitachen shelo yavo alav tzivui min hashamayim. When there is an authentic and correct idea or thought, it is inconceivable that it won't ultimately be instructed and commanded by God. Ela sheyesh reshit kol lefanot el Moshe ve'el Aaron. But it has to go through the proper channels. And the proper channels is first to consult, to turn to Moshe and Aaron. Kainhu haseder. That is the proper order. Lefanot kodem el roshei ha'uma. First to turn to the leaders of the nation. Mitoch kach mitchadshim zarmei kodesh chadashim ba'olam. And through that, new streams of holiness will emerge in the world. Ad kedei tosefet ve'mitzvot mitzvat Pesach Sheni. Tosefet od mitzvot ba'olam mikoach habakasha hazot shel Asafan u'Mishael b'nei Uziel. Until the point that we even have a new mitzvah of Pesach Sheni, and the addition of even more mitzvot in the world from the request and petition of Elzaphan and Mishael, the sons of Uziel. It's a remarkable insight. Okay, what does he say is the connection between Mishael and Elzaphan and Nadav and Avihu?
They're first cousins, aren't they?
They're first cousins, but why were they the ones chosen to deal with the bodies and to have that fundamental connection with Nadav and Avihu?
Because they were good friends with one another. They
Okay, so that we saw that earlier.
Yeah.
What's Rabbi Shirky saying?
Their reaction to things were polar opposites, that Nadav and Avihu thought that they could, that the Yiddish expression is make Shabbos for Zichalein. They could go their own way and that would be fine. And Uziel, Mishael and Elzaphan asked for permission. They sought higher authority.
Okay, beautiful.
Which is the opposite of what Nadav and Avihu did. But what strikes me about this is, couldn't they keep? They certainly could keep the rest of Pesach, which is matzah maror. They wouldn't eat chametz during Pesach, even though they couldn't offer the korban Pesach. So they were
presumably you're right. Presumably the Isser, right, in the Sefer Chinuch that we're learning between Mincha Marv on Shabbos afternoon. We just touched on the fact that eating matzah is its own independent mitzvah, not connected to the Korban Pesach. Certainly, the Isser Chametz, the prohibition against Chametz would apply.
right.
But we forget because we don't have it. But the Korban Pesach was the essential expression of the holiday, and so even if they would have kept the negative mitzvot, and even if they would have eaten matzah, to not offer Korban Pesach, that really was the essential and the key components, or the wow factor of Pesach when the Mishkan and the Beit HaMikdash stood. So to not be able to offer the Korban Pesach was seen as a huge loss, and that's why Pesach Sheni was given as a concession in a way to ensure that people could offer the Korban Pesach. So I just want to tweak though what you said at the beginning, Vina, a little bit. I'm not sure that he's saying they're the polar opposite. I think they're saying that Nadav and Avihu, again, there's very different takes on the story, but what he seems to be saying is that they were caught up in some religious ecstasy, and they were looking to get closer to God, to bring about spirituality and holiness in a way that maybe wasn't prescribed by the Torah, and that was their mistake. That it came from a good place, and so the tikkun of Mishael and Osafan is that they were able to take that same desire for holiness, for sanctity, for spirituality, and do it in the proper fitting way. So their tikkun was to take that core desire, that core feeling, and do it in a quote kosher, acceptable way. And I think it's a beautiful take on this. Again, Gary asked, well, how do we know this? And we don't know for certain. I think it's a beautiful explanation. I happen to be drawn to these types of things where we look at these minor characters, these curious details that the Torah says, and you can develop entire theses, entire doctoral dissertations on this. I enjoy those deep dives. I hope that you did as well. Certainly to examine these minor characters and what the heck they're doing here, as Anne said. Who are they, and why were they connected to Nadav and Avihu at all? So I think that we saw a lot of really interesting suggestions to that question. As always, are there any final thoughts or questions on what we saw tonight?
I was just thinking what an act of compassion it actually was for Moshe to give them this responsibility, because one of the hardest things I think when someone passes, I know this was true for me when my mother passed, because she was thousands of miles from me, and it was so frustrating. What can I do? But thank God, we were able to come to her grave and all. But to have something concrete to do to show their appreciation of the lives of these two was itself almost like an act of compassion on Moshe's part, but helped with their grieving, perhaps.
Right. I think there's something very true to what you just said. There's also, it adds to the complexity of the story, because if that is in fact part of what was going on, then it's even more stark that the closer relatives were not allowed the opportunity for that. That Aaron, Elazar, and Tamar were excluded from any of the burial rites. I think you're absolutely correct that part of the power of the laws of mourning are that it does really concretize things, and gives a way to channel and conduct oneself during these times of intense emotions. But it adds to the tragedy of Aaron and his remaining sons, why they were denied that opportunity.
And also the altercation between Moshe and Aharon, and it's so-called altercation, whether he should be eating from this sacrifice or that sacrifice, and what to do, and to know concretely what one could do is a blessing also in a situation like that.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Gary, are you convinced?
Have some plausibility.
Okay. Well, we'll take that. We'll take that, I guess. All right, everyone. Have a great night. Looking forward to seeing everyone over Shabbos. And see you again next Tuesday, back on Zoom.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Just beautiful.
And
Bye,
you'll
Latov.
have
Bye, Tov.